So in the last lecture, um, we were just talking about the build up to Fidel meeting this Argentinian named Che, and several others that are going to attempt to get on this boat and basically overthrow Batista's government. And with many setbacks, the rebel army that he creates coming in succeeds, and by 1958, he led a successful struggle from the Sierra Maestra mountains. I'm cutting out a lot, of course. If you really want to be blown away, just really go into a study about how this happens. It does say several things. First of all, about the tenaciousness and the will and ability of Fidel and his company of men, but also the unpopularity of Batista, the U.S.-backed dictator. Right? That would, the only way to make sense that he'd be able to go basically, cut through into the mountains of Cuba and gather enough support to basically, it was a revolution against Batista. So keep that in mind. This was not like a communist revolution. Okay, there were a lot of communists in it, and remember, Fidel Castro wasn't. Now his brother was a member, and the Communist Party, ironically, was legal under Batista, kind of under his control. He allowed them to be legal and then kind of defanged them. And the Communist Party wasn't a part of this. In any case, Fidel arrives triumphantly into Havana. Okay, and is very popular at the time. No one was quite sure the direction he would take the country, but the U.S. was very uneasy about it even then. The two men that I just want to mention in his group was Che and Raul. Raul right here is the brother who is now currently, kind of functioning as the ruler of Cuba. And then again, there's the famous Che. There's a movie recently about him that I think is decent if you want to watch it. And this is the famous portrait of him. And when you see this, probably most of you have seen this picture, and you're going to say, "Oh gosh, I recognize this." It's like on every college kid's right next to a Bob Marley poster, in college towns. The profile is very famous. Some say infamous, depending on what side you are. I know some Cuban Americans who see this picture like a Jewish person seeing a picture of Hitler. On the other hand, I know some Cubans and some other Latin Americans, people from Latin America, who see him as like a Robin Hood, like a real, fighter on behalf of the majority of poor and struggling people of the world. I showed you a picture of Mike Tyson with a tattoo of Mao. Here's a tattoo he also has of Che. I'm not sure what Tyson's political positions were, but he's got two commies tattooed on his body. And if we look at here, Johnny Depp and Rolling Stone, and what's this little picture here? Again, Che. So in popular culture, this profile is popular. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of people that wear the Che emblem may not necessarily be that political. They like that. It's kind of like atheists wearing a cross or picture of Jesus, right? But anyhow, I just thought I'd throw that your way. Okay. So Cuba did shake up the Western Hemisphere, and the U.S. was really furious that they lost Cuba. And so let's talk about now Chile a little bit. So Chile is a really significant country in terms of a controversy about the way the U.S. did things. And during the Cold War years, maybe less controversial. So what do we have to talk about? The socialist, he was a physician. He was a socialist, Salvador Allende. He ran in the elections from 1952 to 1970. He was a known character. In 1964, the U.S. government poured in millions of dollars into his opponent's campaign. So again, let's just think about this. Can you imagine that a foreign government give I mean, can you imagine if Obama received millions of dollars in campaign money from Saudi Arabia or China, right? It would be just an outrage. Or Bush getting some from X, Y, or Z country. But for the U.S., this is not an uncommon thing, or not just the U.S. Richer countries going into poorer countries and kind of trying to promote a character that they think, or a regime that would be more favorable to our interests in a democracy. So in 1970, despite this U.S. intervention on these on the things that are on the down low, he was elected by a very narrow margin. I think for the most part, it's not argued that he didn't, it's not a contested election, but it was a narrow margin. But he won in a democracy. So the Nixon administration wasn't going to have this. And, Allende wanted to be close to other people in the region that the U.S. saw as a threat. So Fidel Castro now, he ends up eventually aligning himself with the Soviet Union, and he's a communist, and this is terrible, and here he is, and then, Allende goes over to meet with him, and it's all bad, right? So Nixon cuts off Chile's source of credit and pressures foreign lenders to collect their debts. CIA does propaganda intervention by telling shopkeepers to put away all their stuff and say that there's a shortage. Basically lies being put out in certain media campaigns. Everything to discredit him. And then he just made a lot of unwise choices himself. And inflation rose 566% by 1973. So Allende's presidency was struggling as him being an opposition candidate to the big empire in the hemisphere. So what's going to happen? Okay, so we're going to end the lecture here and we'll continue on in the next phase.